Hey, good day to you. This is Stan Prochowski with Prochowski Estate Law, and this is the Ask Stan show every Thursday at 12 noon, where I answer all your estate planning questions submitted throughout the week. If you have a question about wills, trusts, Medicaid pre-planning, Medicaid crisis planning, the nursing home, or just estate planning in general, just send them to me here on Facebook or call me at 363-7222 or email me at prochowskiestatelaw@gmail.com. I'll answer them live on WKSR Radio, and we post them here on the Ask Stan show every Thursday. So, let's get right to it.
Right there, Tommy James and the Shondells. I think we're alone now. That is picked by Stan Prochowski, the Stan Prochowski oldie of the week.
Oh yeah, that puts you in the mood for this kind of weather, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It sure does. Good to have you back and see what you have to share with us today.
Well, I want to talk about, you've heard me often talk about things like power of attorney and planning documents and things that people need to do for, incapacity and things during life. We do a lot of planning for after death and stuff, but there are certain documents and certain powers that don't survive death. And those are your power of attorney for health care, power of attorney for financial affairs. And I often get asked the question from usually adult children who come to me about their parents, and they say, look, I've been trying to talk my parents into doing something, but they're either stubborn or they just constantly reject the idea of establishing like a power of attorney for themselves. So I've often interviewed some of those folks just to find out like what's the reason you're reluctant to do that. And, I interview them all the time, and the number one reason that people tell me why they resist a power of attorney is they say they don't want to give up control of their property or their decisions. And I get that. And I really don't blame them. You work all your life, you've accumulated a lifetime of wealth. You want to make sure it's used the way that you want it used, right? That's what you want. So the problem with that thought process is that it doesn't consider the possibility of an incapacity. It assumes that you're always going to be able to make your own decisions. That's why you don't want to give up the control. You figure you're going to make more. But incapacity happens a lot, and it comes in all kinds of forms. It can be progressive, like dementia, or it can be rapid, like a stroke, or anywhere in between. This kind of incapacity is why I urge people to have a power of attorney in place. Because once capacity is lost, someone has to make your decisions for you.
Well, Stan, nobody plans on being incapacitated. That usually just happens, right?
That's right. Usually. You can have forms of dementia where you can kind of see it coming, but most folks who have dementia and they see it coming are faced with like a denial, won't admit that that's happening to them, and that can be an issue. But you're right. The number one cause of incapacity is stroke. It just happens. You don't ever see that coming. If you do, you got just a little bit of warning. But the big question is, if you want for power of attorney, do you want it to be someone that you trust, who knows what your wishes are, or are you willing to gamble and let other people decide for you? That's what we're really talking about. Without a power of attorney, you put yourself in a position to be abused by self-serving people. Now, that could be family members, but it could be someone else, like a caregiver or some opportunist. I'm going to give you an example of each. One's a family member, one's just an opportunist, of what can happen to you if you never establish a power of attorney for whatever reason, whether you're stubborn or just don't think you need it or just don't want to. You remember Casey Kasem?
Oh yeah.
Back in 2014, he was suffering from a strange disease called Lewy body disease. The name's not important, but it's a branch of dementia due to Parkinson's disease.
Right.
But it left him barely able to talk. And he had some daughters, and his family had been at odds with his wife. His wife's name was Jean, over visitation rights. She wasn't allowing the daughters to come and see him, and the daughters had evidence that she was exhausting his estate for her own self-serving reasons. So the daughters filed for conservatorship because there was no power of attorney for Casey, and his wife was just assuming that authority and was deciding what was best for him. She really wasn't acting under a power of attorney, she was just doing it for him. So once the daughters filed this conservatorship in May of 2014, Gene Kasem started moving Casey around from hospital to hospital and was refusing to let the children know where he was and to come visit him. So, remember Casey Kasem, the famous voice of America's Top 40,
yep.
And a little known fact, he was also the voice of Shaggy on Scooby-Doo. So he ended up being reported missing by the
daughters. I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was reported missing by the daughters, and the daughter, they sought their conservatorship, and Anyway, Casey was finally declared missing after a while, I think back in May 12th of 2014. At that time, the daughter had sought a temporary conservatorship to kind of facilitate the search effort to find out where he went to. He's 82 years old at the time, and he was found up in Washington State, which was pretty far away from where his home was in California. So there's an example where family, I mean, that wasn't Casey's first wife, so it wasn't the mother of these children. There's a case where a family can just sort of take over and just assume this control, and spend his money. He's unable to do it, he's unable to talk. Who would question that? She just doesn't. But then they find him, they find him somewhere else because they move him around because they can only get away with it if they keep the family members out. So another one I want to tell is not actually a case I had, but it's a story told me by a client of mine that they wanted to avoid. And they had an elderly mother, we'll call her Patty, and she lived in a home with a friend. The friend's name was Bill, and he was a family friend. I mean, he was 30 years younger than Patty, but he used to work in a family business with them, and he lived with her, and he paid rent, and he did odd jobs and stuff like that. He had his own work outside of that, and everything seemed okay and fine until they started to notice some suspicious activities of Bill, and especially the way he acted toward Patty. And then they also noticed that their mom, Patty, was starting to get hostile and strange actions towards her own children. So the children are suspicious that Bill's taking money from Patty and that might be suffering from dementia because she's acting strange, but they don't know. But she didn't have a power of attorney or any kind of document that to execute for her children to be her agent. So the children were pretty much powerless because there was no power of attorney. So they can't gain any kind of control over her finances. Because nothing existed at that time.
Well, now, if someone like Bill doesn't have a power of attorney, how are they getting at their money?
Well, what happens is you got someone like Bill and his influence. She's obviously not capable to make all her own decisions because if she could, she'd probably tell Bill to pack sand or be more discreet about or more intelligent about those decisions. But if she's compromised or somewhat incapacitated, and Bill is there in her ear all day long, he can influence her and say, hey, sign this check, for this, and do this, and that's how that happens. That's how that abuse becomes, because they're there and they exert that influence. And as you're going to see, they can exert the influence even better if they can keep that person away from the family. Because what happened in this case, these children pursued their conservatorship over the mom, and of course, when you have to file a conservatorship, one of the things they have to do is you need a doctor's opinion. So the court orders a doctor to give an evaluation to see if the person actually needs, is incapacitated and needs someone making their decision. So what happened in this case was the doctor went over and he examined the mother, and he found out that he declared that she was in fact diagnosed with dementia and shouldn't be making her own decision. And immediately after the petition was filed, because that's what you need to part of the petition. Immediately after the petition was filed, turns out Bill packed up suitcases and took the mom, Miss Patty, off to California. Okay, but Bill, God bless him, stopped in Nevada to marry her. Okay, so when you ask how do they get at the money, here's the answer. He was 52, she was 86. They stopped in Nevada, where it's so difficult to get a marriage. But being facetious, of course. I mean, if you got $20, I guess you can get married. So they get married, and so the family ended up hiring a private investigator, trying to find out where they went, what's going on. But they did find out that Bill was trying to sell her house. They were able to stop that because they had a pending petition for conservatorship. So they stopped the sale of the house. And I guess Bill gave it up, and the private investigator finally finds her. She's living alone, abandoned, in an apartment north of Los Angeles. So the family, manages to go and get her and bring her home. But that's how that sort of thing tends to happen. People are in a position and they are the only person in their life and they just influence them.
So a simple power of attorney before any incapacity happens will prevent this.
That's right. And now, you got to remember one thing. I guess you could put somebody in power of attorney and they could do something rogue. Okay, you want to pick people you trust. Second of all, a power of attorney is not a blank check. It's not like, hey, I got power of attorney and I need new tires on my truck, so I'm going to go get something for myself. It is a fiduciary duty. It's held to a high standard. A good way to think of power of attorney is you are bound by the court and you're subject to prosecution if you don't. You're bound by the court to stand in that person's shoes, conduct their financial affairs as if you were them doing it the way they would do it. And if buying yourself a new car is not something they would have done anyway, then you're not allowed to do it. So it's a fiduciary duty. And again, nobody plans for incapacity, so you can put power of attorney in place now. Doesn't mean people are going to be making your decisions. You decide when that happens, or the incapacity decides it for you. But when it happens, you can't regain it. If you lose the capacity to give power of attorney, then you can't give it. Then you've got to get a court-ordered power of attorney, which we call conservatorship. We do them all the time, and the stories are sad. And it gets complicated, and it gets expensive, and it takes a long time. So the real takeaway is if you're reluctant to do power of attorney, and you're thinking you don't want to give up control, listen, you're not giving up any control. If you lose capacity, you need somebody to make those decisions, and you need it to be someone who loves you, cares for you, and do the right thing. Not somebody that's taking care of you and mowing your grass, or Julio the pool boy that can talk you into things that you can't resist being talked into. So that's really what it's about. And think of it this way. It's not you giving up control. This is really something that you're doing for your family. Because if you don't have this power of attorney and incapacity strikes, and they have to go through a conservatorship, I mean, you're not going through it because you're incapacitated. If your family has to go through a conservatorship, you've just given them a couple of months worth of misery, cost, and uncomfortable and hard feelings. So don't do it. It's a simple thing to do. As you mentioned, a simple power of attorney. Put it in place now. You may never need it. Just like life insurance, I guess. You may never need it. If you don't, well, that waste of paper and waste of ink all goes for nothing. But if you need it, it's there, and your family will, trust me, they'll thank you for it, because these are just two of the stories that we hear. I mean, we hear them all the time, and they're never good. There's never a good outcome. I guess you just don't hear about the good outcomes. So, anyway, that's power of attorney. That's what we do at Perchowski Estate Law. That's all we do is estate planning, elder law. We do some Medicaid planning, crisis and pre-planning, that sort of thing. Give me a call over there if you got any of these issues, or if you see something like this going on and wonder what you can do. The answer is plenty. We just have to bring it to our attention, and let's get started with it. There's lots we can do if you see this happening to a family member. So give me a call over there at the Square, 363-7222. And, bring your problems there. I like to talk. The girls usually have to reel me in when I talk too much, but other than that, bring me what you got. We'll talk about it. I guarantee you we can come up with some solution to whatever problem you have.
All right. Good information this morning. Thank you, Stan. Good to see you, man. Have you back today.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Good weather. Hope it hangs in there as long as it can.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Butch.
We'll see you next week. Thank you.